It's official. Six Flags. America is gone. After 50 years, no farewell tour, no slow goodbye, just locked gates and a corporate press release. But this was never about low attendance or rough seasons. This was a plan, a land play, a number on a spreadsheet that became bigger than nostalgia, roller coasters, and family memories. And here's the part nobody talks about. This isn't just one park, it's a pattern that's spreading fast. And if it happened here, is your favorite theme park next? 50 years of laughter ends in silence. On the morning of May 1st, 2025, Six Flags. America confirmed what had been whispered for months. After 50 years of operation, the gates would close for good on November 2nd, 2025. There was no fanfare, no slow goodbye tour, just a press release and a stunned silence that rippled across Maryland. For half a century, this park had been the sound of summer children laughing under the coasters, parents holding melting ice cream cones, the buzz of music drifting across the Midway. Now it was over. Those who lived nearby described the eerie quiet that followed. The roller coasters, once roaring through the air, stood still in the spring sun. Faded paint peeled off steel rails that had carried millions of riders. Ticket booths that once rang with chatter now sat empty. Windows taped with notices. 50 years of memories erased with a single announcement. It wasn't just another park closing. It was another reminder that the things Americans build for joy never seem to last long once accountants get involved. Reporters filled airtime with nostalgic reels, 90s fireworks, children on Ferris wheels, but disbelief lingered. How could a park that outlasted recessions and storms collapse in an era built on entertainment? For locals, it was personal, imperfect yet beloved. It carried generations through change. Every closure has a sound, the final gate latch, the silence after music fades. A reminder that another piece of American leisure has gone dark. Yet behind that somber announcement was a statement so polished it could have come from a training manual, and it said far more in what it didn't reveal. The polished statement and the hidden truth. The official release was brief and neatly worded. Six Flags Entertainment Corporation announced that the property no longer aligns with our long-term growth strategy, and that redevelopment opportunities will best unlock portfolio value. To the average reader, it sounded sterile, almost responsible, but anyone who's watched corporate language evolve knows what those phrases mean. Growth strategy means consolidation. Portfolio optimization means closure. Redevelopment opportunity means liquidation. The statement never mentioned the workers, the families, or the 5 decades of Maryland history embedded in the soil. It didn't acknowledge the roller coasters freshly painted just a year before, or the staff who had just been told to expect another full season. The timing was deliberate. Announce early, keep emotions controlled, let the story fade before the final operating day in November. It was a quiet end, planned with corporate precision. Analysts saw a familiar story. When growth slows, sentiment dies. Six Flags. America didn't fail, it stopped fitting the formula. Corporate focus shifted to larger parks, and loyal crowds became data points. The press release spoke of shareholder value, but beneath the optimism lay a quiet truth. It wasn't progress, it was goodbye. And once you strip away the language, the motive becomes painfully simple. Land, not legacy, was the real treasure. If you've made it this far, you're one of the few who still care about what's being lost. Hit that like button, subscribe for more real stories they won't tell you, and share your thoughts below. This conversation deserves real voices, not headlines. Land worth more than legacy. The property that held Six Flags, America, isn't just any patch of Maryland dirt. It sits near Washington, D.C., a region where every square foot of land has skyrocketed in value over the last decade. Company insiders quietly confirmed that the land alone, about 500 acres, could fetch between $40 and $200 million, depending on zoning and redevelopment terms. To investors, that number spoke louder than attendance charts ever could. For years, the park's revenue had hovered near the break-even line. Attendance slipped, upkeep costs rose, and capital investments slowed to a crawl. It wasn't failing dramatically, it was fading gradually. Then, someone ran the math and realized the ground beneath the park was worth more than the park itself. From that moment, the decision became inevitable. Developers long-eyed the Bowie Upper Marlboro land as prime real estate, and once accountants saw its worth, memories lost their value. Locals understood around DC. Condos always win. It's the American cycle, joy replaced by rent. Soon, demolition crews will revitalize what 50 summers built, trading connection for efficiency, laughter for silence. And while the corporate world calculated its gains, those who'd lived the park's story were left counting something else entirely, what they'd lost. The people who grew up inside those gates. For many Marylanders, Six Flags. America wasn't a luxury, it was a local ritual. Families marked birthdays there. Teenagers worked their first summer jobs, sweeping walkways and running rides. Couples met in line for roller coasters that no longer run. Parents watched their children grow taller by the height markers on the entrance signs. The park wasn't famous for being grand. It was beloved for being near, familiar, and constant. Former employees spoke about the pride of keeping it alive year after year, even when budgets tightened. "We made do with what we had," one said. "We painted the rails ourselves, fixed things with our own hands, because we cared." When news of the closure spread, those voices filled online forums and local papers, not with anger, but with heartbreak. For many, it felt like watching a hometown landmark sink quietly into memory. This closure cuts deeper than nostalgia. It marks the loss of America's gathering places, ballparks, fairs, and boardwalks, once united ordinary people. Now, each vanishes for profit. When the final fireworks fade on November 2nd, 2025, 50 years of laughter will end, leaving weeds where joy once stood. Every shuttered gate closes a little part of local history. But this didn't happen overnight. The foundation started cracking years ago. From Wild World to the flagship that never was. The story of Six Flags America began with promise, long before corporate press releases and redevelopment plans. In the late 1970s, the land near Bowie, Maryland, opened as a modest attraction called Wild World. It wasn't built by a massive company or a global brand, but by local ambition and attempt to give the DC and Baltimore region a summer destination to call its own. Families packed picnic baskets, the parking lots filled every weekend, and for a while, it felt like the start of something lasting. By the early 1990s, Wild World had transformed into Adventure World, aiming to compete with the heavyweights like Hershey Park in Pennsylvania and King's Dominion in Virginia. Rides were added, shows expanded, and local commercials promised a world of adventure just down the road. The crowds came, but the park could never quite match the polish or prestige of its rivals. It was scrappy, familiar, and slightly rough around the edges, an underdog that survived on effort more than flash. When Six Flags bought the park in 1999, hopes soared for a true flagship. But over time, it became the middle child too small for glory, too large for neglect. Attendance held steady, budgets tightened, and fresh logos couldn't hide the aging rides. What began with ambition ended in routine, as Wild World's original spark dimmed beneath corporate weight and cautious investment. And when the paint started to peel, both literally and financially, what showed beneath it was a story of survival without support. Maintenance deferred, magic lost. By the early 2010s, the signs of wear were visible from the parking lot. The roller coasters still ran, but they rattled more than they used to. The water rides showed their age, and the once busy walkways felt a little too quiet on weekdays. Visitors noticed, but so did the staff who worked through long summers, trying to keep everything running on limited resources. "We did what we could," one former maintenance worker said, but it felt like fixing leaks on a sinking ship. Budget cuts became a yearly ritual. Planned upgrades were delayed, and once ambitious projects quietly vanished from future plans. Paint jobs replaced full restorations. Old attractions were removed and never replaced. Few headline rides like Superman, Ride of Steel, and Joker's Jinx carried the marketing load for years, but even they showed their age. A new coat of paint could make the place look alive, but no color could hide the exhaustion underneath. As rivals expanded with new rides and festivals, Six Flags America felt frozen in time-fresh paint over aging bones. Maintenance costs climbed while budgets shrank, creating a slow spiral of decline. Yet workers kept patching and welding, driven by loyalty, not profit. But nostalgia can't mend concrete forever. Beneath every coat of paint, the rust kept spreading, quietly sealing the park's fate. And while maintenance issues could be patched by dedication, the next problem came from far above the local level, from boardrooms that saw amusement parks not as landmarks, but as assets. The merger that changed everything. When Six Flags and Cedar Fair announced their merger, most of the attention went to the headline, Parks Cedar Point in Ohio, Magic Mountain in California, and Great Adventure in New Jersey. Hidden between those grand names were the smaller properties like Six Flags America, whose future suddenly hung on balance sheets instead of memories. On paper, the merger was about efficiency. In practice, it was about trimming anything that didn't produce immediate returns. Executives called it a portfolio review. They examined every park for profitability, growth potential, and redevelopment value. Those that failed to meet the new threshold were labeled non-strategic. That's corporate shorthand for expendable. It's a pattern anyone familiar with American industry has seen before when companies fuse. The spreadsheets decide which towns stay on the map. By 2024, attendance stagnated, upgrades stalled, and valuable land drew more interest than rides. The merger gave executives cover to close without shame. Maintenance slowed, rumors spread, and hope for a buyer faded under aging costs. As leadership executed its plan, resistance vanished. Efficiency triumphed, identity vanished, and Six Flags America became another casualty of corporate arithmetic where the numbers worked, but the hearts never did. And once the merger dust settled, the only figures that mattered were the ones written in a final valuation column. When the numbers finally ruled the map. By the end of 2024, the decision was finalized in a single internal report. It concluded that the value of the land near Washington, D.C. exceeded the park's projected revenue for the next decade. The phrase highest and best use appeared multiple times, a technical term meaning the property could make more money being something else entirely. That phrase sealed the fate of Six Flags America. The logic was flawless from a corporate standpoint. The land could support housing developments, commercial projects, or logistics centers, all more profitable than a seasonal park with heavy upkeep. Within the company, the decision was framed as portfolio optimization. But behind that phrase was a simple truth. Joy doesn't scale the way rent does. By January of 2025, redevelopment was already underway. Contracts signed, studies ordered, and a final season planned as a quiet farewell. When news broke, sadness met inevitability. It wasn't scandal, but math. The numbers won, and a half-century ended not with applause, but with appraisal. And while the numbers added up neatly on paper, the people left behind didn't fit in the equation. The workers who gave it life. Before the roller coasters and the fireworks, before the families lined up at the turnstiles, there were the workers who opened those gates every morning, ride techs, concession cooks, ticket clerks, janitors, and lifeguards. People whose names never appeared in press releases, but whose work made the park breathe. They came from nearby towns, often returning season after season, building friendships that lasted long after summer ended. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it was honest. In the blistering heat of July or the chill of a late October Fright Fest, they kept things running. Some had been there for decades, starting as teenagers and staying on to lead crews, train newcomers, or maintain the machines that carried laughter through the air. The regular guests recognized faces, not titles. A familiar voice at the funnel cake stand. A wave from a ride operator who remembered your kids by name. These were the small moments that turned a park into a community. When the closure came, workers felt it beyond lost wages. It was purpose erased. "We built joy for strangers," one said, until someone stopped counting that as value. Now bulldozers wait where laughter lived. The rides will fall, the pavement cleared, and those who gave it life will scatter, carrying pride and loss in equal measure. And for the visitors who once filled those gates, the loss runs just as deep, because those summers built more than revenue. They built memories that shaped entire generations. Families, friends, and first summers. Every region has that one spot where the sound of summer seemed to live forever. For Maryland, that was Six Flags America. Families came every year, chasing the same rides and the same routines. Parents taught their kids which coasters were worth the wait. Teenagers met at the gates, their pockets full of ride tokens and bravado. School field trips ended with sticky fingers and tired smiles. When word of the closure spread, it wasn't just nostalgia that hit people, it was recognition of time passing. The park was a marker, a place to measure the years. Kids who once rode the carousel grew up and brought their own children back. Couples who first met in line for a roller coaster celebrated anniversaries in the same spot. For many, those summers weren't just vacations. They were the backdrop to life itself. Now, cranes rise where coasters once roared, and laughter gives way to construction noise. The lot that held thousands will soon be divided into parcels, yet memories remain. That park was more than entertainment. It was a community anchor, a rare place where real laughter echoed off steel and childhood turned quietly into memory. But even when hearts and hands gave everything, Six Flags. America couldn't compete with its powerful neighbors, and that gap, more than anything, sealed its fate. If you believe stories like this still matter, make sure you're subscribed. Every week we break down the truth behind the news others ignore. Stay with us, because what's disappearing next might be closer to home than you think. Outpaced by neighbors, not effort. The competition was fierce, and the geography unforgiving. Within a few hours' drive stood some of the nation's most iconic parks: Hershey Park in Pennsylvania, King's Dominion in Virginia, and Busch Gardens Williamsburg along the coast. Each one offered new rides, higher budgets, and aggressive marketing. Their commercials promised the latest thrill, the biggest drop, the best family experience. Six Flags. America tried to keep up, but it was like running a race with uneven shoes. Visitors compared notes, and the verdict was consistent. Hershey Park was cleaner. King's Dominion had better rides. Busch Gardens felt more polished. Six Flags. America, despite loyal fans, couldn't shake its reputation as the smaller cousin in a crowded region. It wasn't for lack of effort. The workers did their part, the management tried seasonal promotions, and even local media gave it attention. But every new upgrade somewhere else made its aging infrastructure look older. By the mid-2010s, rivals like Hershey Park and King's Dominion expanded, while Six Flags America survived on repaints and loyalty. Locals kept it alive long past logic, driven by pride more than thrill. As one analyst said, bigger parks had budgets and fame, but not bigger hearts. In the end, proximity couldn't compete with prestige. And as competition turned ruthless, the amusement industry itself began to change. Fun was no longer a feeling, it was a formula. When fun became a formula. In the beginning, amusement parks were built around wonder. Each had a unique character, a sense of place that belonged to its region. But over the years, the business of fun became something else entirely, an equation. Analysts studied foot traffic, adjusted prices by season, and mapped guest engagement through data points. The heart of the park became a spreadsheet. Six Flags. America fell victim to that shift. Every decision came down to cost per ride and profit per square foot. Creativity gave way to templates. Rides were cloned across multiple parks under new names, stripping away what made each location feel special. The art of entertainment turned into an algorithm of efficiency. When the system worked, it produced consistent profits. When it didn't, places like Six Flags America were quietly removed from the formula. The fall of Six Flags. America mirrors a national shift. Once, the country built lasting places with soul bridges, theaters, parks that outlived their founders. Now, permanence feels inefficient, and even joy is leased by the quarter. The park's charm was never perfection, but familiarity. And when that soul faded into corporate uniformity, visitors didn't need spreadsheets to sense what had quietly died. And what happens to a country when even its laughter is outsourced? The chain reaction across the map. The closing of Six Flags America did not happen in isolation. Across the country, the same quiet headlines have been appearing one by one, often buried beneath bigger national stories. In California, Great America announced its end after nearly 50 years of operation, its land sold to developers with promises of future growth. In the Midwest, smaller parks in Ohio and Missouri have shuttered their gates under similar logic land value, outpacing the price of joy. One by one, the bright spots dim, not from lack of love, but from lack of patience. Each closure follows a familiar rhythm. First comes the polite statement about strategic portfolio realignment. Then, the local news segments showing nostalgic families sharing their final visits. After that, a period of silence while the land awaits its next purpose. It's a sequence as predictable as any business cycle, and it says something about the direction of a culture that once prided itself on creating spaces for shared happiness. Across America, drive-ins, ballparks, and racetracks vanish, victims of short-term profit over lasting meaning. The nation's rhythm shifts fairs and festivals replaced by construction and ribbon cuttings. Six Flags. America's closure isn't local, it's symbolic. Each lost park erases a piece of shared memory. And when enough disappear, a country forgets how to celebrate itself. And the irony is that, on paper, it all looks like progress, an upward trend hiding a downward truth. Progress on paper, loss in reality. After the announcement, county officials spoke of revitalization. Plans were drafted for mixed-use housing, retail corridors, and community spaces. The drawings looked impressive, sleek buildings, wide sidewalks, green areas labeled as public parks. Investors praised the project as an opportunity for modern growth. On spreadsheets and zoning documents, it made perfect sense. But to those who had grown up with Six Flags America, those maps looked like a eulogy written in glass and concrete. Town hall meetings reflected that divide. Developers presented economic forecasts, promising hundreds of jobs and millions in local tax revenue. Residents spoke with emotion, not figures. They asked where families would go for affordable fun, or where teens would work their first summer. Some questioned whether the community needed more stores, when it already had memories it could never replace. Nostalgia isn't resistance, it's belonging. People don't mourn rides. They mourn what those grounds meant, a place where joy cost nothing. Now, construction replaces laughter, and officials call it progress, while locals call it loss. On paper, value rises, but meaning fades. New roads will stand where memories once lived, and progress will take root, but history will not. Yet, the story doesn't end with nostalgia. It continues with the people who once found their first glimpse of adulthood within those gates. The vanishing summer job. For decades, Six Flags America was more than an amusement park. It was a classroom without walls, teaching lessons that no textbook could. Teenagers learned to show up on time, handle money, deal with crowds, and work through long, hot days without complaint. Those first paychecks weren't just cash, they were milestones, proof that effort had value. For many local families, the park gave their kids a safe, structured way to learn independence. When the park closes, that tradition disappears too. Hundreds of seasonal jobs vanish, replaced not by new opportunities, but by silence. Construction work may come later, but those projects are temporary and often outsourced. The steady cycle of summer employment, a rhythm that shaped countless young workers, comes to a stop. A small but vital bridge between youth and adulthood collapses with it. Older workers lost both income and identity, their decades of service ending with a press release instead of a farewell. Across America, hands-on jobs vanish as digital ones replace them, reshaping not just the economy, but the nation's character. Six Flags. America wasn't only a park, it was a proving ground where generations learned work, pride, and purpose. Now that classroom of real life is gone, and that leaves one final question, one that stretches far beyond Maryland. What does it say about a country that keeps selling the very spaces that once held its joy? What it means when joy is temporary. When Six Flags America closes its gates for the last time, it will mark the end of half a century of shared experience traded for property tax projections and zoning plans. For some, it will be another news story. For others, it will feel like losing a piece of childhood that can never be rebuilt. Yet beyond the emotion lies a warning one that reaches beyond amusement parks, beyond Maryland, and into the heart of what modern America has become. This isn't a story about one company or one decision. It's about a national habit of treating everything land, labor, leisure as temporary. The pattern repeats everywhere. Sell the stadium, pave the track, replace the park. Profit is immediate, but meaning disappears. Every generation inherits fewer places to gather, fewer shared traditions, fewer anchors to remind them that community isn't built online, it's built in person. Progress isn't the enemy, but progress without preservation erodes culture. When profit replaces permanence, connection fades. America's greatness lay not in what it built, but in what it kept. Each lost diner, fare, and Parksteel's identity, leaving one question echoing through the silence. What remains when shared joy is gone? America keeps selling its gathering places and wondering why we feel further apart. Now I want to hear from you. What park or place from your childhood would hurt the most to lose? Drop it in the comments. If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. We're uncovering more stories like this. I'll see you next time.